What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemens with the Z podcast. So, for the past 3 or 4 Father's Days, there's this church near me that does a bench press competition. I'm not making it up. There's dads lining up, spotters standing by, crowds cheering as guys try to put up as much weight as they can on a Sunday right outside the church in the name of honoring fathers. I've talked about this specific thing before ad nauseum on the podcast and written about it a bunch. And every year it just comes back around. I find myself saying the same thing. This is kind of the most honest symbol I've ever seen for what Father's Day has become in a lot of churches. Not because it's extreme, but because it's typical. Trip away the barbell, and it's the same message you'll find in almost every Father's Day service. There's always a competition, always a pressure, always a hierarchy. You're at the top. Here's what that means. Don't forget it. The celebration, if you call it that, only ever comes in one flavor: physical, hyper-masculine, narrowed down to this one version of what a man is supposed to be. You're the head of your household, you're the culture creator, you're the one standing between your family and everything that wants to destroy it. Satan is at the door. Protect and provide. Don't you dare drop that weight. Stuff like that. And I don't know if I've ever said it out loud before, but I'll say it now just in case. If I walked into that church on Father's Day and saw this bench press competition set up in the lobby, there's no way I would feel inspired. I wouldn't feel celebrated. I'd feel immediately insecure. Because that's not me. That's not what I want to do. And, but that's what this version of fatherhood does. It doesn't just celebrate one kind of dad. It quietly tells every other kind that they didn't make the cut. And you carry that out the door with you, right back into the week. And I've started to dread this Sunday, not because I don't love being a dad. I do, more than almost anything in the world. But it's because I know what's coming. Another round of fear dressed up as exaltation, another reminder of everything I'm supposed to be holding up, and the not so subtle message that if I'm not strong enough, vigilant enough, or quote unquote manly enough, I'm the reason it falls apart. But here's the thing, though, underneath all of that, the sermons, the bench press, the talk about being the head of the household, there's just this fear it's there all the time, right below the surface. Fear of everything I can't protect my kid from, fear of the world they're growing up in, fear that I'll get this wrong in some way that I won't even see until it's too late. I know that's what all of us feel, right? We feel that fear. For a while, I thought it was, the answer to that fear was more control or vigilance. Be the wall, be the shield. But then I started really looking at the story Jesus told. The parable of the prodigal son. And I realized that the father in that story isn't a wall. He's not a shield. He doesn't bench press anything. He runs. And so every year I find myself thinking the same thing. What would the Father's Day sermon I actually would like, what would it sound like? Not another sermon about carrying more weight or a reminder that I'm responsible for everything. Not another call to be stronger, tougher, more vigilant, and more masculine. I already know the fear. Most dads do. We know what it feels like to lie awake wondering if we're getting it wrong. We know what it feels like to carry the pressure of trying to protect people we love from things we can't control. So, if I got up to stand on a stage this Father's Day and I were to preach the sermon I actually wanted to hear, I don't think I'd talk about being the head of the household. I don't think I'd talk about leadership. I don't think I'd talk about authority. I talk about this father in the story Jesus told who runs. So let's look at the story. It's in Luke 15, the parable of the prodigal son. Jesus starts it simply. There's a man with two sons and a request that stops the story in its tracks before it even really begins. So you have this younger son that comes up to his father and saying, "Father, give me the share of the property that belonged to me." So the father divided his property between them. Now here's how this parable usually gets preached. It's the son's request. It's basically a betrayal. It's the original sin of the story. An ungrateful kid basically telling his father, "I wish you were dead," walking out the door with his father's life's work in his pocket. And from there, everything that happens to him is framed as the consequence of that one selfish, disrespectful ask. But what I want you to sit with is the fact that the father said yes. He said yes. And think about what that request actually required. So, in that first century culture, a son asking for his inheritance early wasn't a small thing, it was almost unthinkable. Fathers held the authority, the property, the family's entire economic future. For a son to even ask, to walk up to his father and say, "Give me my share now." It's wild, but I think in some ways, he had to believe, maybe on some level, that this relationship could survive the asking. And that's not nothing. Think about every relationship you've ever been in where you couldn't ask for what you needed, where you knew, just knew, that even bringing it up would cost you. You don't ask people like that for anything. You manage them, you stay small, and you wait it out. This son didn't do that. He asked. And then the wildest thing, his father didn't disown him. He didn't lecture him, didn't make him grovel for the privilege of leaving. He just gave it to him. He gave it to him. Here's the detail that gets skipped a lot, almost every time. The text says in the beginning, like I said, the father divided the property between both sons, not just the one who left. The older son, the one who stayed, did everything right, never left, apparently he got his share too, right then in that same moment. Whatever this father was, he wasn't keeping score between his kids. He wasn't doling out love based on who deserved it more. Both sons were already provided for. Both were already loved. The leaving didn't create a wound in this relationship. In a way, it revealed something solid that was already there, solid enough to risk. So, the son takes his share and he leaves. And the story doesn't soften what happens next. He goes to some distant country and burns through everything. And every translation of this parable has some version of it wasted it on wild living. A famine hits. He ends up feeding pigs, which for a Jewish audience is about as low as the imagery could possibly go. And he's so hungry, he's eyeing the slop he's feeding them. This is the part of the story that sermons love to sit in, the wreckage, the consequences. See what happens when you leave. Here's what I want you to notice instead. Notice what's happening back home the whole time this is going on. We don't get a scene of the father during this part. No dialogue or description, just silence. And then later, this line: while he was still far off, his father saw him. Far off. And I want us to stop and think about that for a second. You know, you don't see someone far off by accident, do you? You don't catch a figure on the horizon because you happen to glance up at the right moment. You see someone far off because you've been looking, because you've been scanning that road, not just today, but probably for a long time, maybe every day. And that's the part that I don't think gets preached enough. Because the waiting the father was doing wasn't passive. It wasn't, well, I guess he'll come back if he comes back. Nothing I can do about it now. It seems like the father was watching actively, restlessly. The kind of watching that doesn't let you fully relax, doesn't let you fully move on, because some part of you is always half listening for the sound of someone coming up the road or walking in the door. That's the fear right there. I think that's the fear the father was afraid of. I think he was probably sitting there imagining the worst, wondering if his son was alive, wondering if he was hurt or if he'd ever see him again. That fear didn't go away just because the son was out of sight. But look at what that fear turned into. The text says the moment he sees them, while the son is still far off, the father runs. Now, a man in his position and in that culture did not run. Running was undignified. It meant pulling up your robes, exposing your legs, looking ridiculous in front of the whole village. And the whole village is not an exaggeration because everyone would have seen this. The father's status, his dignity, his standing, all of it thrown aside in public for this. And then the son, the text tells us he rehearsed a speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. He'd planned this. He was ready to earn his way back in, one humiliating step at a time. But he never got to finish it or say it. Because the father was already there, arms around him, and before a single word of that speech is fully out, and then comes the robe, a ring, a fattened calf, all of it, restoration of full status, full sonship, a celebration. It was given before any proof, any probation, any let's see how this goes. The father didn't wait to see if the apology was sincere enough. The father didn't wait at all. You know, this son, he hit absolute rock bottom. Okay, I'm coming back to the son for a second. He was feeding pigs, and he was about as far from home as a person can get. And shame, real shame tells you in moments like that that there's no going back, especially after what the son did. He's probably thinking he burned the bridge, that whatever he had was gone for good. But what's funny about this, and what I keep coming back to, is even with what he was dealing with in that country, he got up and tried to come home anyway. And for me, what I think that means is somewhere underneath all of that shame, he still believed that coming home was possible. He still believed that that road led somewhere, not because he figured something out in the pig pen, but it was probably because of who his father had already been to him for years before any of this happened. The foundation of all that didn't just produce a kid secure enough to leave, it produced a kid even after wrecking everything, still believed return was possible. That's a powerful thing. But there's one more character in this story that we need to talk about. The older brother. His older brother's been out in the fields all day working, same as always, and he comes home to find the house full of music and dancing. And he asks one of the servants what's going on and gets the answer. Your brother's back, and your father has thrown a party. And brother won't go in. Can you blame him? Put yourself there for a second. You stayed. You did the work. Every single day you showed up, and nobody threw you a party for that. Nobody killed the fattened calf because you were still here. And now the one who left, who took his share and burned through it all, as he puts it, wild living, he comes home and the celebration seems to be bigger than anything that you've ever gotten. All right? So the father sees this and comes out to him. And again, notice that. The father leaves his own party, his own celebration, to go stand in the dark with his son, who's furious and refusing to come in. This is the second time in the story the father goes to someone. Okay? This running wasn't a one-time thing reserved for the dramatic return. It seems like this is just what the father does. And so the older son lets it all out. Listen, for all these years, I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. When this son of yours comes back, or came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And I think this might be the most honest moment in the whole story, because that's the voice of someone who's been keeping a ledger the whole time. Every act of obedience, every year of faithfulness, logged and tallied, waiting for it to pay off, and it never did. Not like this, anyway. I think honestly, honestly, we could preach a whole sermon on that feeling alone, right? But here's the thing. The father doesn't argue with the math. He doesn't say, well, actually, you've gotten plenty. He doesn't shame him for feeling this way, or tell him he shouldn't be angry, or lecture him about gratitude. He just says, and it's coming straight from the Bible, Luke 15:31, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. You are always with me. And everything I have already is yours. It's the same posture, the exact same one. No ledger, no score. The older son thinks the celebration is something being taken from him. Like grace is this limited resource, and giving it to his brother means there's less for him. The father's answer is it was never a limited resource. It never worked like that. You didn't earn what you have either. It was already yours the whole time. The same way it was already your brother's the whole time he was gone. You know, Henry Nouwen wrote a book on this parable. I'm in the middle of it while reading it. But one of the things that has stuck with me as I'm reading it is that he didn't see himself as the younger son in some distant country, and he didn't see himself as the father either. That felt too far away, too aspirational. What Henry saw when he was, you know, writing about this was he saw himself in the older brother, dutiful, resentful, standing in the dark, refusing to come in, convinced that love was something other people were getting that he'd somehow have been shorted on. And I think that's where a lot of us actually live, not in some dramatic far off rebellion, just out in the field doing the work, quietly keeping score without even realizing it. The hardest part of this story might not be becoming the kind of father who runs. I think it might be letting go of being the kind of son who won't go inside. But here's kind of what's sticking with me too about this story. It's not the younger son, the inheritance, the party, the father watching the road, because I understand that. I understand what it feels like to love someone and know I can't control where their story goes. I can understand wanting to protect my kid from every mistake, heartbreak, bad decision, and every wound. And if I'm being honest, I think a lot of Father's Day sermons just tap directly into that fear. They just give us a different answer. They tell us to become stronger, more vigilant, more in control, build a bigger wall, carry more weight. But the father in this story doesn't seem interested in becoming a wall. He seems interested in staying available. That's a very different thing. And the longer I sit with this parable, the more I think that's what gets me. The father can't stop his son from leaving. He can't follow him into the distant country. He can't make his choices for him, and he can't remove the famine. He can't prevent the pig pen. The only thing he can do, and what he did, is remain the kind of father who's worth coming home to. Honestly, that feels both harder and more beautiful than control. Because control promises certainty, but presence doesn't. Presence just keeps the light on, keeps watching the road, keeps believing that return is possible. And maybe that's the question I've been carrying around ever since I started thinking about this story. When the fear shows up, and it does, what will it turn me into? Will it make me smaller, more controlling, more anxious, more convinced that love means managing every outcome? Or will it move me toward the people I love, to my wife, my kid? Will it make me easier to come home to? Because if my kid remembers one thing about me years from now, I don't think I want it to be that I protected him from everything. I think I want it to be that he always knew where the door was. Forget the bench press. That's not the competition that matters. That's what is. That's what matters. And one more thing before I go. Okay. I started this episode talking about fathers, about bench presses and Father's Day and the pressure that comes with trying to hold everything together. But the longer that I sit with this parable, the less I think it's only about parenting. Because not everybody listening to this is a father. Some of you might be the younger son or daughter. Some of you might be the older brother or older daughter, or older sister, I'm sorry. Some of you are carrying wounds from fathers and parents who never watched the road, never came looking, and never ran. Some of you are discovering that the hardest person to extend this kind of grace to is yourself. What keeps pulling me back to this story is that nobody in this is treated according to a ledger. Not the son who left, not the one who stayed. Both are met with the same posture, the same open hands, the same refusal to reduce a person to their worst moment or their best performance. That's the invitation to me. Not just to become the kind of parent whose child believes they can come home, but to become the kind of person who believes that also about other people. And maybe, and this one might be even harder, to believe it about ourselves. That we're more than our failures, more than our scorecards, more than the stories we tell ourselves about why we don't deserve a seat at a table. Maybe the real miracle in this parable isn't that the father runs. Maybe it's that nobody has to earn the right to be loved once he gets there. I said at the beginning of this, I wanted to write the Father's Day sermon I needed to hear, and I think this might be it. Not because it takes the fear away, not because it gives me a blueprint that guarantees everything turns out okay, but because it reminds me that being a father was never about carrying the most weight. It was never about becoming an impenetrable wall. It was never about controlling every outcome. Father in this story doesn't win because he prevents the leaving. He wins because he makes the return possible. And honestly, that feels like a much better Father's Day sermon than a bench press competition. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clemens with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or send me a DM over the Clemens with a Z podcast Instagram page. If you want to support the podcast, the easiest and best way you can do it to support this show is by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can share it with a friend, post on your socials, drop it in a group chat. It all helps more than you know. You can also support the podcast financially. And if you'd like to, you can head over to clemenswithaz.com. I got a merch store over there with shirts, stickers, all kinds of stuff. You can also donate directly through the GoFundMe. The link is in the show notes. Every little bit goes a long way in helping me keep these conversations going. And if you're looking for something a little bit more regular, maybe you're a reader rather than a listener, you can check out my Substack, Devotions for the Disillusioned, the Deconstructing. That's where I share short reflections, devotionals, and some extra thoughts that don't always make it onto the podcast. This podcast keeps going because of listeners like you showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And thanks for being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.